Yesterday morning I heard a knock on the garage door, slow, steady, like someone who'd rehearsed it. I was under the hood of the old Chevy, elbow deep in grease, and for a second, I thought it was just the wind pushing something loose. But then it came again. 3 knocks. Patient. Almost polite. The kind of sound that carries a memory before you know why. When I wiped my hands and looked up, the clock on the wall read 7:42, the same clock that hadn't ticked right since my brother left town 30 years ago. Funny how time holds a grudge when you do. I opened the door halfway enough to let the cool air and drizzle slip in. The man standing there looked worn, flannel shirt faded to gray boots, scuffed a duffel bag hanging off one shoulder. His hair was streaked with white, his face unshaven, but his eyes, those eyes stopped me cold. I'd seen them in the mirror every morning, just younger and angrier. He said, "You hiring by any chance?" His voice had that rasp, the kind that carries miles of road and one too many regrets. For a heartbeat, I forgot how to breathe. 30 years gone. And here he was, my brother Daniel. The same man I'd left behind when everything went wrong. The same man I'd blamed to save my own skin. I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to hug him. I did neither. Instead, I heard myself say, "Depends what kind of work you're looking for." He nodded like he expected that. Didn't push, just wiped rain from his forehead and said, "Anything with my hands. Don't need much." Silence stretched between us, the kind that has its own weather-heavy gray full of things unsaid. The rain picked up. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and a truck rolled by slow. The kind of morning where the world keeps turning, even when your past shows up at the door. I stepped aside. "You can come in out of the rain." He hesitated, then crossed the threshold. His boots left small puddles on the concrete, right between the oil stains and my shadow. He looked around the garage, the old tools, the radio humming low, the coffee mug half empty on the bench. His eyes landed on the framed photo near the shelf. 2 kids by a river, one holding a fish too big for his grin. He smiled just a little. "You kept that?" "Guess I did." The radio crackled a burst of static, then a song from 1987, the same year he left. The same year I said something I could never take back. He turned toward me, rain dripping from his hair. "Didn't expect you'd still be here. Didn't expect you'd cock," I said. He laughed, once dry, almost gentle. "Me neither." For a moment we stood there like 2 strangers, sharing the same ghost. The air smelled of wet earth and gasoline. My watch ticked louder than usual. Then he looked at the Chevy and said, "She still runs." I nodded. "Barely, but yeah." He smiled again, soft this time. "Guess we've both held on longer than we should." And that's when it hit me, the first crack in the wall I'd built all these years. Because maybe he wasn't here for work. Maybe he was here for forgiveness. And maybe, so was I. The rain tapped the roof steady, like an old clock, finding its rhythm again. Somewhere deep inside, a part of me whispered, "It's time." Daniel sat at the edge of the workbench, hands wrapped around the coffee mug I'd poured him. Steam rose between us like a fragile peace offering. The rain outside softened to a drizzle, tapping the tin roof in slow rhythm. I leaned against the hood of the Chevy, arms crossed, trying not to stare too long. Every few seconds he'd glance around the garage, the same place we'd built our first go-kart when we were 12. I could almost hear our laughter from back then, before life had teeth. He finally spoke. "You still fixing cars?" "Some. Not for pay much anymore. Keeps me busy." He nodded. "Busy's good." That silence again. Long enough for the radio to hum out another old tune. "Simple man. Leonard Skynyrd. Figures." He sipped his coffee, winced at the bitterness, then smiled faintly. "Still make it strong enough to wake the dead." "Guess it worked," I said before realizing what I'd just implied. He didn't flinch. Just set the mug down gently and said I wasn't sure if you'd even open the door. I took a breath. I wasn't sure either. He rubbed his hands together rough. Cracked the kind of hands that tell a story without words. Been bouncing around, he said. Couple construction jobs, mostly out west. Got tired of sleeping in trucks. I nodded, pretending that was news. I'd heard stories through cousins, through town talk. He'd never settled anywhere long. Maybe because I'd taken away his chance to. Why now? I asked quietly. He shrugged. Was heading east. Ran out of road, I guess. He looked around again, eyes softening on the tools. The old calendar. The Chevy. Saw the light on. Figured I'd ask if you needed a hand. There it was, that word again. Hand. Like the one I'd turned away 30 years ago when he reached for help. The memory hit sharp. It was the summer of '94. We'd been working at Peterson's garage then. A customer's truck came in missing parts. And when the boss found out he wanted someone to blame, I could have told the truth that I'd borrowed the carburetor for a side job, that Daniel didn't know a thing about it. But I didn't. I let him take the fall because he was younger, because I was scared, because cowardice wears the same face as survival when you're 25 and broke. He lost his job. Left town. 2 weeks later. Never came back. Until now. I cleared my throat. You could have gone anywhere. He met my eyes. Maybe. But there's some roads you can't drive around forever. My hands started to shake a little, so I picked up a wrench just to have something to hold. Metal steadied me better than words. He leaned forward, elbows on knees. Look, I ain't here to dig up what's gone. Just needed work, Bob. Maybe a few days. Maybe a week. That's all. I wanted to believe that. But I saw the truth in his eyes. He needed more than a job. He needed to know if the brother who'd betrayed him was still the same man. I put the wrench down. You can stay in the old room out back, if you want. He looked surprised. Still standing. Barely, I said, half smiling. But it's dry. He nodded, the corner of his mouth twitching like maybe he wanted to smile too. We sat in that quiet again, listening to the rain. The ticking watch on my wrist felt louder now, each second stretching thin, as a confession, waiting its turn. Outside, thunder rolled far off, slow and tired. Daniel finally stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. Appreciate it, Bob. Really? I nodded once. We'll start early tomorrow. He paused at the door. Just like old times. I swallowed hard. We'll see. When he stepped into the rain, the radio flickered, then cut to static, a sharp hiss like the past clearing its throat. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The rain had stopped, but I could still hear it. Ghost echoes in the gutter. A soft dripping that matched the pulse in my head. The house felt smaller with Daniel here, like the walls remembered him too. I sat by the window, watching the reflection of the porch light on the puddles. The old radio on the counter whispered static between songs. I turned the dial slow until I found a weather report: calm winds, cool morning ahead. Nothing dangerous. Nothing worth worrying about. But my chest still felt tight. Around midnight, I made a pot of coffee I didn't need and went out to the garage. The air smelled of oil and rust, and I felt at home in that scent, the way soldiers must feel. Hearing an old war song. I wiped down the tools, checked the Chevy's battery, anything to keep my hands moving. Then I saw it, the old wooden box on the shelf behind the paint cans. It hadn't been touched in years. Inside were photos, old letters, and one envelope still sealed. My handwriting on the front. Daniel, I'm sorry. I never mailed it. Couldn't. I'd written it the night he left town. A coward's apology. Written too late. My fingers trembled as I held it. For a second, I thought about tearing it open, reading the words aloud just to feel them escape me. But I didn't. I slid it back in the box and shut the lid. Some truths still burned too bright to touch. When morning came, the air was crisp, washed clean by rain. I found Daniel already outside, sleeves rolled up, fixing the fence behind the garage. His hammer rhythm echoed steady, same as it used to sound when we built our first shed at Dad's place. I walked over with 2 mugs of coffee. "Didn't think you were an early riser anymore." He grinned faintly. "Didn't think I was either. Guess old habits die slower than we do." We worked side by side for a while. No talk, just the sound of wood and nails. The silence between us wasn't sharp anymore. It was careful, like both of us knew one wrong word could break it. At one point, he stopped and looked at me. "You ever wonder if we could have done things different?" I didn't answer right away. My hand tightened around the hammer. "Every damn day." He nodded like he understood, then went back to work. I figured, he said softly. I did too. That hit harder than I expected. Because for the first time I realized he'd carried his own guilt, not just mine. Later, when the sun crept higher, we took a break by the truck. I handed him a rag to wipe his hands, and he caught sight of my watch, the old silver one Dad gave me before he passed. "You still got it," Daniel said. "Never took it off." He smiled. Dad always said that watch ran on forgiveness. Maybe he was right. I looked at the ticking second hand. If he was, it's been running slow. That made him laugh, real laughter this time, rough but alive. I hadn't heard that sound in decades. A warm breeze carried the scent of wet earth and motor oil. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe we were okay. Maybe time could weld what pride had cracked. Then Daniel said quietly, "There's something I should tell you." I froze. "What's that?" He stared down at the ground, voice low. I wasn't the only one who took the blame back then. The wind shifted. The radio from the garage flickered on by itself, a faint hum like static coming back to life. I looked at him, the wrench slipping from my hand. "What are you saying?" He met my eyes, and for the first time I saw pain deeper than anger. "I mean, I didn't tell you everything, Bob." The ticking of my watch filled the space between us, sharp, merciless, alive. For a moment the whole world went still. Even the wind seemed to wait for what came next. Daniel's eyes were fixed on the gravel at his feet. "That day at Peterson's," he said slowly, "I didn't just take the fall, Bob. I let you think I did." The words tangled in my chest before I could find air. "What do you mean you let me?" He looked up, calm, steady, almost sad. "The carburetor. I knew about it. I just didn't stop you." I felt the heat rise behind my ears. "You could have told me that 30 years ago." He nodded. "Yeah, I could have." The silence that followed had weight, like old rain-soaked lumber ready to snap under its own history. He went on. "I was scared too. You were older, knew more. I figured, if I stayed quiet, maybe you'd make it right." He kicked a small stone. "You didn't. So I did what I had to. Left before the shame caught up." I leaned against the fence, trying to steady myself. "You saying you forgave me?" He gave a soft chuckle. "Not cruel. Not kind. No. I'm saying I carried my share of the blame too. Been heavy enough." The radio in the garage hissed, then clicked into a faint country song. The old kind. About brothers' whiskey and the years that get away from you. I didn't know what to say. My throat felt thick with rusted words. He leaned on the fence beside me. "I used to dream we'd meet again somewhere easier. Maybe by that river where we caught that big catfish." You remember? I nodded. I remember everything. He smiled faintly. Guess this'll have to do instead. We stood there, two men who'd wasted half a life on silence, now trying to build something with nothing but nails and memory. Finally, I said, "You want to help me tune the Chevy? I could use a second set of hands." He blinked, surprised, then smiled like it meant more than I knew. Sure. Be like old times. We worked until the afternoon side by side under that warm Ohio Sunday. He held the light while I tightened bolts, passed me tools without being asked. It was like our hands remembered how to be brothers before our hearts did. When the engine finally turned over, that old V8 growl filled the garage rich and steady. Daniel laughed, clapping my shoulder. Still got her purring. I smiled, a small one. Guess I didn't mess up everything. He looked at me for a long second. No. Not everything. We shut off the engine, and the silence afterward felt full, not empty, like the quiet you get at a church when you've just told the truth. I poured us each another cup of coffee. This time, the bitterness didn't bite as much. Daniel leaned back on the bench, eyes wandering to the old photograph again. You ever wonder why Dad kept that truck running so long, even when it was falling apart? I shrugged. He said it was about time. Said engines forgive if you give 'em enough care. Daniel nodded. Guess we're the engines now. The radio buzzed again, a single burst of static before fading into the sound of distant thunder. I looked toward the horizon. Clouds were gathering low, heavy with rain. Daniel stood stretching his back. Looks like another storm. I nodded. Yeah. Maybe a small one. He smiled softly. You sure about that? I didn't answer. Because deep down, I knew the weather outside wasn't the one I needed to brace for. The storm we'd been avoiding was still between us. Quiet. Waiting its turn. And this time, it was coming from me. That night, thunder rolled across the valley like something alive. The kind of storm you feel in your ribs before it hits. I just finished locking up the garage when the first flash of lightning cut across the sky. Daniel was still outside, sitting on the porch steps, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. I hadn't seen him smoke since we were kids sneaking behind the barn. I almost said something but stopped myself. Some habits come back when the air smells like rain and regret. I stepped out holding 2 mugs. Coffee's still hot. He took one, nodding his thanks. The glow from the porch light turned the rain into slow-falling gold. He blew smoke into the air. You remember Mom saying, "Storms wash away what talking can't." I smiled a little. She had one for everything. Yeah, he said softly. Except betrayal. The word landed like gravel in the dark. I didn't flinch, but my throat burned. He stared at the horizon where the lightning flickered behind the trees. You know, I told myself I'd never come back here. Not after what happened. I nodded slowly. But you did. Yeah, he said. Because I realized running doesn't fix the road behind you. Just makes it longer. The rain started to fall harder, a steady drumming on the tin roof. I leaned against the porch post, the smell of wet soil rising all around us. I thought about you, you know, he said after a while. All those years. Wondered if you ever thought about me. I looked down at my hands. The ones that had lied by doing nothing. Every day, Dan. Every damn day. He gave a small, broken laugh. Guess that makes 2 of us. Lightning flashed again, lighting his face, older now. Tired but not bitter. Just worn. You ever think I said quietly that maybe what we did back then wasn't the worst thing? Maybe the worst thing was not forgiving each other sooner. He looked at me for a long time before answering. Maybe. But forgiveness doesn't come with a switch, Bob. It comes with miles. We sat in silence, listening to the rain. The ticking of my watch mixed with the soft hiss of the storm like the sound of time breathing again. After a while, Daniel said, "You know that night you came by the shop after it all went down, I was still there, hiding in the back." My head snapped up. "What?" He nodded. "Heard you talking to Peterson. Heard you say it was all me. I wanted to come out, but then I saw your face." The wind howled against the porch, and for a second the years between us collapsed. "I saw guilt," he said. "Real guilt, not fear. That's why I didn't say anything. Figured if you could live with it, that was punishment enough." My stomach twisted. The rain blurred the edges of everything. "I lived with it," I said hoarsely. "But I didn't live well." He stubbed out the cigarette, rain hissing on the ember. "Neither did I." The thunder eased, rolling further away. The air smelled like metal and mud. I took a deep breath. "Then maybe it's time we stop punishing ourselves." He looked over, eyes wet from more than rain. "You think it's that easy?" "No," I said. "But maybe it's that necessary." He nodded, slow, thoughtful. The kind of nod that feels like the start of something, not the end. We sat there until the rain faded to a whisper. Somewhere inside the radio clicked on by itself again, a soft hum. A half-lost song. Daniel smiled faintly. "She still picks her own moments." "Huh. Always, as I said." The radio crackled, the watch ticked, and for the first time in 30 years, I felt the air between us start to breathe. The next morning the world smelled clean again. Rain always leaves behind a kind of quiet that feels like mercy. The grass shimmered under the sunrise, and the puddles on the gravel drive caught the light like tiny mirrors. Daniel was already up, standing by the fence line, watching the fog lift off the fields. He had a shovel in his hand, though he didn't seem to be using it, just holding it like a man not sure whether to dig or to rest. I brought out 2 mugs of coffee. "You planning to build something or bury it?" He smiled without looking back. "Haven't decided yet." We stood side by side in that easy morning silence, the kind you only earn after saying the hard things. After a while I said, "Got a carburetor that needs cleaning. Figured I'd show you the new setup I've got." He nodded. "Lead the way." Inside the garage, the light was soft and gold, filtering through the dusty window panes. The air carried that old familiar scent of oil, rust, and forgiveness, trying to find its shape. We worked without much talk. He knew my tools like he'd never left. I watched how his hands moved, steady, sure, careful. The way you move when you've learned how easily things break. At one point he said, "You remember when we used to fix Dad's truck after dark? You'd hold the light, I'd cuss at the bolts." I laughed quietly. "And Mom would yell from the porch, saying we were scaring the neighbors." He chuckled. "Yeah. Guess we never scared much except ourselves." The memory hung there between us, soft and warm. But as I looked at him, something else stirred in my chest. That letter I'd found in the box last night, it hadn't left my mind. The words inside were still sitting like a stone behind my ribs. Finally, I said, "There's something I want to show you." He looked up, curious. "Yeah." I walked to the shelf and pulled down the wooden box. Set it on the workbench between us. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "What's that?" "Old ghosts," I said quietly, opening the lid. Inside were the photographs, the folded notes, and on top the envelope with his name written in my shaky handwriting. He stared at it for a long moment before reaching out. His fingers brushed the paper like it might bite. "I wrote it the night you left," I said. "Never sent it. Didn't have the right to." He swallowed the sound, small but heavy. "Can I?" "Go ahead." He slid the letter out, unfolded it slow. The paper had yellowed, the ink smudged in spots. I turned away, letting him read in peace. The radio hummed softly from the corner, an old tune drifting in and out of static. After a minute, I heard him sniff once. Then again. When I looked back, his shoulders were trembling. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, pretending it was nothing. "You meant this?" he asked. "Every word." He nodded, voice rough. "Then I guess I should have come home sooner." I didn't trust myself to speak, so I just set my hand on his shoulder. He didn't pull away. The letter fluttered slightly in the breeze from the half-open door. It was the same wind that carried the smell of wet leaves of change. Daniel folded the paper back, slipped it into his jacket pocket. "Guess I'll hang on to this," he said softly. "Feels lighter that way." I smiled, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and tired. That's all I wanted. For a while, neither of us moved. The radio clicked again, the static fading into a song I hadn't heard since '94. And for the first time, the sound didn't hurt. That afternoon, the sky turned the color of old pewter. The kind that makes you smell rain before it falls. Daniel was fixing the gutter out front while I sorted through a pile of spare parts in the garage. The rhythm of his hammer above me was steady, comforting in a strange way, like hearing someone breathe on the other side of a thin wall. The radio was low again, crackling between songs caught somewhere between yesterday and now. I wiped my hands on a rag and called out, "You planning to rebuild the whole house while you're up there?" He laughed down at me. "Maybe. Keeps me out of my head." "Good luck with that," I said. He smiled but didn't answer. The rain started as a whisper. By the time he climbed down the ladder, it had turned into a quiet shower, warm, steady, soft. He stood in it like he didn't mind getting wet eyes, half closed, face turned up. "You ever notice," he said, "how rain makes everything honest?" I tilted my head. "How's that?" He shrugged. "Can't hide a thing when it's wet. Every crack, every dent, it all shows." I thought about that longer than I meant to. We went back inside, both dripping, and sat near the workbench. The garage smelled like damp wood and hot coffee. Daniel rubbed his hands together to warm them. "You got any plans for tomorrow?" "Nothing worth writing down." "Good," he said. "Then maybe you can come with me somewhere." I looked up. "Where?" He hesitated. "Back behind Miller's farm. There's an old shack by the riverbank." My chest tightened. I knew that place. It was where we used to fish as kids, where we hid from the world after Dad died. I hadn't been back since the day Daniel left. He must have seen the look on my face. "You don't have to," he said quickly. "I just figured maybe it's time." I nodded slowly. "Maybe it is." The rest of the evening moved quiet. He made dinner, canned beans and eggs, same way Mom used to when money was thin. I didn't have the heart to tell him it tasted better than anything I'd had in months. Afterward, we sat on the porch watching the rain slide off the roof in ribbons. Fireflies blinked over the wet grass, and the night smelled like old memories trying to be forgiven. Daniel leaned back, staring at the horizon. "You ever think Dad knew?" "Knew what?" "About us." We left just after sunrise. The morning fog still hugged the road, soft and white, like the world hadn't woken up yet. Daniel drove the Chevy slow and careful, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the open window. The radio murmured static between old country songs. I watched the fields roll by, the same ones we'd run through as boys. Corn, high air thick with dew, the smell of wet soil clinging to everything. It felt like driving through a photograph we'd left behind. Neither of us said much. Some silences don't need fixing. When we reached the turnoff behind Miller's farm, the dirt road had nearly vanished under weeds. Daniel shifted down the engine, groaning but steady. "Didn't think we'd ever come back here," I said. He glanced at me, a faint smile under his breath. "Guess the river called louder than pride." The shack by the water looked smaller than I remembered. The roof sagged, the wood gray with years of storms. But the smell, river, mud, and cedar, was the same. It hit me like a song you forgot you knew. Daniel parked, killed the engine, and we sat there for a moment just listening to the soft tick of cooling metal. Feels like ghosts still live here, I said. He nodded. Maybe they've been waiting. We stepped out. The grass was high, brushing our jeans as we walked down to the bank. The river moved slow, brown and calm, carrying fallen leaves and old secrets. Daniel crouched near the edge, picked up a flat stone, and skipped it across the surface. It bounced 3 times before sinking. Still got it, he murmured. I chuckled. Barely. He smiled, then turned serious. You know why I wanted to come here. I shook my head. He looked out at the water. This is where Dad told me about you, about what family means. Said blood doesn't mean you owe someone perfection. It means you owe them honesty. My throat tightened. I wasn't honest, Dan. I know, he said softly. But neither was I. When you took the blame for that fight we had with Peterson's boy, I let you. I didn't speak up. I blinked. That was nothing. He shook his head. It was something. I learned from you how easy it is to stay quiet when you should speak. Maybe that's why we both ended up here waiting for someone else to talk first. The wind picked up, rippling the river. The light caught on the surface, gold and silver flickers dancing between us. I sat down beside him, knees creaking. Guess we both learned the same bad lesson. He smiled sadly. Yeah. Took us 30 years to unlearn it. We watched the river for a while. Somewhere upstream, a bird called Long Low, like it was echoing through time. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out the letter. The one from the box. He turned it over in his hands. I've been thinking, he said, maybe this doesn't belong in my pocket anymore. Before I could speak, he set it on the water. The paper floated, the ink already bleeding, the words dissolving into the current. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. He whispered, "Let it go, Bob." The river carried the letter downstream until it vanished around the bend. We sat in silence, just the sound of the water and the faint hum of the truck cooling behind us. The radio inside the Chevy flickered through the open window, a faint voice almost like Dad's caught between static and memory. And then it was gone. Daniel sighed. Well, he said, standing, guess that's one way to send mail. I laughed, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a stranger's voice. We didn't rush to leave. The air by the river had that stillness that makes time slow its step. The mist hung low, curling around the trees, and for a while, all I could hear was the steady lap of water against the bank. Daniel leaned back on a half-rotted post, arms crossed, just watching the current. Funny, he said, how that same river used to scare us. I smiled faintly. You were scared. I just pretended not to be. He grinned. And you pretended pretty good. I remember jumping in first, just so you'd have to follow. Yeah, I said, and you almost drowned. Worth it, he said, chuckling. The laughter settled into the air like an old song finding its way home. For the first time since he'd come back, I saw the boy I grew up with, the one who used to steal apples and dreams in equal measure. Then he turned serious. You know, I've been thinking about Dad's shop. I nodded. What about it? It's still standing. Saw it last time I came through town. He paused. Could use some work, but it could run again. That caught me off guard. You thinking what I think you're thinking. He looked at me, eyes steady. Maybe it's time to open it again. Together. This time. I didn't answer right away. The idea hung there, warm and terrifying. That garage was where it all started, the good and the bad. The thought of walking back into it made my chest tighten. I don't know if I can, I said. Daniel nodded. Didn't say we had to right now. Just think about it. The wind picked up, scattering a few leaves into the river. They spun in circles before drifting off downstream. He stood stretched and said, Come on, let's head back, before that sky changes its mind. On the drive home, we didn't talk much. The radio hummed quietly, a Johnny Cash song about running from yourself. The kind of tune that knows more about you than it should. When we reached the house, the rain started again, thin and steady. Daniel parked under the awning, killed the engine, and just sat there for a moment, staring at the dashboard. He said softly, "You ever wonder why Dad left the truck to you, and not me?" The question hit harder than I expected. I figured because I was the oldest. He shook his head. "Nah. I think it's because he knew you'd need something that could forgive." I stared at him. "You think trucks forgive?" He smiled. "Only the ones that don't quit on you." We both laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it hurt less than staying quiet. Inside the house, smelled like rain and coffee grounds. Daniel started a fire in the small stove while I stood by the window, watching the road glisten under the streetlight. He glanced over. "You think that river washed it all clean?" I turned toward him. "Not clean. Just lighter." He nodded. "Lighter's enough for me." The clock on the wall ticked loud, same rhythm as my watch. For the first time in years, both seemed to be keeping time again. We sat down with our mugs, the sound of rain on the tin roof filling the pauses. After a while, Daniel said, "Tomorrow I'll go by the old shop. See if there's anything left worth saving." I looked up. "You sure?" He smiled. "Yeah. Some things deserve one more try." The fire cracked, sending a soft glow across his face. For a moment, I saw what Dad must have seen: two sons who'd finally learned how to stop breaking what they loved. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. The radio clicked once, then faded to silence, like it knew the night didn't need a soundtrack anymore. By morning, the storm had passed. The air was clear, sharp, the kind that makes the world smell new again. Sunlight spilled through the window blinds, striping the kitchen table, where 2 cold mugs of coffee still sat from the night before. Daniel was already gone when I woke. The back door was cracked open, his duffel bag missing from the chair. For a moment, my chest tightened, thinking maybe he'd left again without a word. Old habits die the slowest. But then I saw it, a note on the counter folded twice, my name in his crooked handwriting. "Gone to check the shop. Back by lunch. Don't worry." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The radio in the corner was whispering static, trying to find a station. I turned the knob until an old blues tune filled the room, slow, gentle, the kind that carries a man through memory. I poured myself fresh coffee and sat by the window, watching the light crawl over the driveway. The Chevy was still there, streaked with dried mud from the river road. The sight made me smile. For years, that truck had been my only company. Now it felt like something more, a witness. Around noon, I heard the familiar rumble of the engine coming down the lane. Daniel stepped out. Hair windblown, grin. Tired but real. He wiped his hands on his jeans. "Place still stands," he said. "Needs work, but she's breathing." I met him halfway across the yard. "You sure you want to bring it back?" He nodded. "I think we both need something to build, instead of something to regret." We drove into town after lunch just to see it. The old Peterson garage still sat at the edge of Main Street, windows clouded with dust. A for lease sign barely hanging on. The faded letters above the door still read Walker and Sons Auto Repair, though no one had been there to earn the name in decades. Daniel stepped inside, first brushing cobwebs off the door frame. The smell hit me immediately. Oil, dust, and ghosts. He walked around, slow, his boots echoing. "It's smaller than I remember," he said. "Everything is," I replied. We found the old workbench still there, a rusted vise frozen in place. Daniel ran his fingers over it. "Dad built this with us." "Yeah," I said, "and we nearly crushed his thumb with it." He laughed. "He deserved hazard pay." That sound, his laugh in that room, it did something to me. It made the place feel alive again, like the walls had been waiting for it. He turned to me, eyes bright, with something I hadn't seen since we were kids. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" I smiled. "That we still owe Dad one more job." He nodded. "Exactly." We spent the rest of the day sweeping, clearing cobwebs, oiling hinges. It felt good, the kind of tired that earns its place in your bones. The sun dipped lower, spilling orange light through the front windows, catching the floating dust like gold. As I stood there leaning on a broom, I realized I hadn't felt this kind of peace in years. Daniel looked over at me. "You know," he said, "we don't have to fix the past. We just have to work on what's left." I nodded slowly. "Guess that's what fixing really means." He smiled, and for once, I didn't see the man I'd betrayed. I just saw my brother. Outside, the wind stirred, carrying the smell of rain from somewhere far off. The radio in the truck flickered faintly through the open door. A few words caught in static. It almost sounded like Dad's voice saying, "Keep it running, boys." Over the next week, the shop began to breathe again. We cleared out old parts, scrubbed down the floors, and patched the roof where the rain had chewed through. Each day felt like turning a wrench on the past, slow, stubborn, but working loose just the same. Daniel handled most of the heavy lifting. I'd catch him humming while he worked. Same tune he used to sing when we'd pull engines together as kids. The one about a man fixing things he didn't break. On the fourth day, I brought in the old clock from my garage, the one that hadn't ticked right since he left. I set it on the counter, wound it twice, and waited. It started ticking again, slow but steady. Daniel grinned when he saw it. "Looks like even time's willing to give us another shot." "Yeah," I said, "about time." We both laughed, easy and full, the kind of laughter that leaves warmth behind. That afternoon, a few folks from town stopped by. Word travels fast in a small place, faster than forgiveness usually. Some came just to look, others to drop off old tools. Nobody asked questions, but I could see it in their eyes. Surprise, curiosity, maybe even hope. Old man Carter from the hardware store leaned on the doorway and said, "Didn't think I'd see you two working side by side again." Daniel smiled. "Neither did we." Carter chuckled. "Guess miracles come cheaper these days." When he left, Daniel turned to me. "You think people'll trust us again?" I looked around the shop at the sunlight spilling across the concrete, the smell of oil and rain mixing in the air. "Maybe," I said. "But that's not why we're here." He nodded. "Yeah, we're here to trust ourselves first." We kept at it until dusk. I was tightening a bolt when Daniel said suddenly, "You ever miss her?" I froze. "Who?" He didn't look up. "Mary." My chest went cold. I hadn't heard her name spoken in years. He continued softly. "She used to come by the shop sometimes, after everything." "I know," I said quietly. I always wondered if she knew the truth. "She did," I said. "Eventually." Daniel sighed. "She was good for you." I smiled faintly. "Yeah. And I wasn't good for her." The silence that followed was gentle, not sharp. Like we were both standing on a memory that had stopped hurting. After a long pause, he said, "She wrote me once." I looked up. "What?" He nodded. "A letter. Didn't say much. Just that she hoped we'd find a way to be brothers again someday." That hit harder than I expected. "Why didn't you tell me?" He shrugged. "Didn't seem like you were ready to hear it." I swallowed hard. "Maybe I am now." He smiled. "Then I guess she was right." We worked in silence after that. The light fading, the sound of the ticking clock, filling the room like a heartbeat. Before we left, Daniel turned off the lights, looked around and said, "You think Dad would be proud?" I took a long breath. "I think he already is." Outside, the air was cool, heavy with that smell that comes before rain. Daniel locked the door, and we stood there for a moment, under the street lamp glow. He said, "Tomorrow I'll paint the sign again. Walker and Sons. Maybe it's time folks remember it right. I nodded. Yeah, maybe it's time we do too. The radio in the truck clicked on, as if it had been listening the whole time. A low hum, soft, static, then a single line of a song. Don't let the light go out. We didn't. By Friday, the new sign was finished. White letters on a deep green board. Walker and Sons Auto Repair. Daniel stood back, brush still in hand, studying it the way you study something you've waited your whole life to see again. Looks good, I said. He nodded, a quiet pride in his eyes. Guess it finally means something again. The paint was still wet, gleaming under the morning Sunday. For a moment, it almost looked new. Like the years between us hadn't rusted anything at all. Inside, the smell of oil and primer mixed with fresh coffee. The radio hummed faintly from the counter, some old blues tune with a voice like weathered leather. Daniel turned to me. We're gonna need customers if we want to keep the lights on. I smirked. I'll start by fixing the Chevy again. She's our best billboard. He laughed. True enough. That old truck's seen more redemption than either of us. The day moved slow and steady. We fixed a mower someone dropped off, tightened a few bolts on an old Ford that hadn't started since summer. People passed by nodding, some stopping to talk. By afternoon, it almost felt like the years had rewound themselves, two brothers working shoulder to shoulder, grease on our hands, hope in the air. Then around 4, a familiar figure crossed the street, Sheriff Hayes. Same hat, same half-suspicious squint. He stopped at the doorway and tapped his badge. Heard the Walker boys are back in business. Daniel wiped his hands. Guess word travels faster than rust. Hayes chuckled, then looked around the shop. Can't say I ever expected to see you two here again. I met his eyes. Neither did we. He nodded. Town's got long memory, Bob. But sometimes memories fade faster than we think. There was something kind in his tone I hadn't heard before. He took off his hat. My cruiser's been stalling. Think you can take a look? I smiled. Be glad to. He grinned. Then maybe this town's ready to forgive both of us. After he left, Daniel leaned against the doorframe, shaking his head. Didn't think we'd ever get his trust back. Maybe trust starts like this, I said. One engine at a time. Evening came slow. The last light poured through the dusty windows, painting everything in gold. I caught Daniel watching it, the way the glow landed on the clock on the sign on our hands. You ever think we'd get here? He asked. I shook my head. Not once. He smiled. Me neither. But I'm glad we did. The quiet between us was easy now. The kind that feels earned. The rain started again. Outside, soft, patient. It tapped the roof like an old friend, checking in. Daniel turned the radio up a notch. The static faded, and the same song from the river came on, the one that had followed us through every silence. He looked over. You think Mom would have liked this place? She'd like that we're talking again, I said. She'd like the coffee too. He laughed, shaking his head. That bitter mud you make. Doubt it. I grinned. She'd drink it just to prove a point. We stayed late, cleaning tools, sweeping floors, humming along to the radio. The shop felt alive, like time itself had clocked in again. As we locked up, Daniel said, Tomorrow, we'll hang the open sign. Yeah, I said quietly. Tomorrow. He looked at me for a long second, the rain light flickering in his eyes. You think the past ever really lets go? I thought about the river, the letter, the storm. Maybe it doesn't have to. I said. Maybe it just learns to stay quiet. He nodded. Then I can live with that. The radio clicked off by itself. The only sound left was rain. Saturday morning came with sunlight, sharp enough to make everything shine. The rain had scrubbed the air clean, and the scent of wet asphalt drifted through the open shop door. The open sign hung crooked but proud. For the first time in 30 years, it meant something again. Daniel was already under the hood of a pickup, sleeves rolled, humming low. I watched him work for a while, that same quiet focus Dad used to have. Every movement slow, sure, unhurried. Like the man had learned patience from pain. I brewed coffee, poured 2 cups, and carried one over. "First customer, due at 10, I said. He smirked. "Hope it's not just Hayes again." "Nah," I said. "Mrs. Keller's sending her grandson. That old Pontiac of hers needs a miracle." Daniel grinned. "We though miracles now." "Occasionally," I said, "when the weather's right." He laughed, and the sound filled the shop, soft, familiar, alive. Around 10:30, the boy showed up, barely old enough to shave. Nervous, polite, holding the keys like they were fragile. Daniel showed him how to check oil and filters, patient as ever. Watching him teach, I saw the kind of man he might have become if I hadn't broken things back then. While he worked, I stepped outside. The sun hit the chrome of the old Chevy, turning it into a mirror of memory. I ran my hand along the hood, felt the warmth. That truck had carried every version of me, the liar, the coward, the man who finally learned to stay. Behind me, Daniel's voice drifted out through the open door. "Bob, hand me the socket wrench." I smiled. "Still bossing me around, huh?" He chuckled. "Old habits." We finished by noon. The Pontiac purred again, engine smooth like it remembered how to live. The boy grinned, handed over a crumpled 20, and said, "Grandma'll be real happy." "Tell her we said hi," Daniel said, waving. After the kid left, I leaned against the counter, wiping my hands. "Feels good, doesn't it?" Daniel nodded. "Better than I remembered." He turned toward the window, watching the lights scatter across the wet road. "You know, I used to think forgiveness was something someone gave you. Like a key." I looked at him, and now, he smiled faintly. "Now I think it's a thing you build. One piece at a time." I nodded, throat thick. "Guess we're finally building something worth keeping." He didn't answer right away. Just looked out toward the horizon. "I'm thinking of heading south next month," he said quietly. The words hit me harder than I expected. "South," he nodded. "There's work down there. Construction, maybe. Just for a while." The silence between us felt different this time. Not angry. Not sad. Just real. "I figured you'd want to stay," I said. "I did," he said. "But I can't stay in one place forever, Bob. You know me. I just needed to make things right before I moved on." I swallowed hard. "You already did." He smiled, eyes soft. "Then maybe it's easier to leave." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The radio hummed from the back bench, a quiet, wordless tune. The kind that fills the air just enough. Finally, I said, "Then at least let me drive you to the bus station when the time comes." And nodded. "You got a deal." We stood there as the sun lowered behind the shop, its light glinting off the new sign. Daniel said, "You think the name will stick this time?" I smiled. "Yeah. I think it already has." The radio crackled once, a burst of static that faded into silence. And for the first time I realized silence didn't always mean loss. Sometimes it just meant peace. The day Daniel left came sooner than I wanted. A week later, the air had turned crisp October, kind of cold where the morning breath hangs long and the leaves start to rust at the edges. He packed light, same as always. Just the duffel bag, a thermos, and the jacket Mom patched the year before she passed. The one with his name stitched crooked on the sleeve. I stood by the truck while he loaded up. The Chevy idled, soft, steady, like it knew this wasn't a goodbye so much as a pause. "You sure you don't want breakfast before you go?" I asked. He smiled. "If I eat your coffee-cooked eggs again, I might not survive the drive." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're still a smartass." Runs in the family, he said. We both went quiet for a while. The town was still half asleep, mist curling off the fields beyond the road. From somewhere far off, I could hear a train low distant, the sound of leaving. Daniel leaned against the open door looking out at the horizon. I nodded slowly. Took the long way around, but yeah. I think we did. He looked down at his hands. I was angry a long time, Bob. I didn't even know what I was angry at anymore. But standing in that shop with you, he paused, searching for words. It felt like home again. My throat tightened. It is home. Always was. He smiled faintly. Then keep it running all right. Don't let the dust settle again. Yvonne. He reached out a hand. I took it firm. Steady. Warm. For a moment, it felt like all the years we'd lost. Folded into that single grip. Then he said, I left something for you under the counter at the shop. Don't open it till I'm gone. I frowned. What is it? He just grinned. A surprise. Don't ruin it. Before I could press him, he climbed into the truck. The door creaked, the same way it always had. He rolled down the window and said, Don't forget to change the oil in that clock of yours. I chuckled. That's not how clocks work. Sure it is, he said, starting the engine. Yours runs on forgiveness. Remember, the truck rumbled down the gravel drive, taillights glowing faint red through the morning fog. I watched until they disappeared over the bend. The silence afterward wasn't empty. It felt clean, like rain after a long drought. I stood there a while listening to the ticking of my watch. The same rhythm as the engine fading down the road. Later that afternoon, I drove to the shop. The air inside was still golden with dust motes catching the light. On the counter, I found a small wooden box, the same one I'd used to keep that old letter. This time it wasn't empty. Inside was a folded note and a photo. The photo showed us as boys by the river mud up to our knees, laughing like we didn't know what regret meant yet. The note said, You kept the letter. I kept the forgiveness. Now we're even. I sat there for a long time, the sound of the radio whispering static from the corner. The same tune again, that broken old song that somehow always found the right moment. When the light faded, I turned the sign on the door to closed. But for once, it didn't feel like an ending, just a pause. Winter came slow that year. The kind of winter that slips in without knocking, first through the chill in the mornings, then through the quiet that settles over town once the leaves are gone. The shop stayed open most days. Work came in steady, a couple of trucks, a tractor, even Hayes' cruiser again. Folks started saying it felt like the old days. And maybe it did. The radio still hummed its same soft static like it belonged to the walls now. Some mornings I'd catch myself setting out 2 mugs of coffee before remembering Daniel wasn't coming by anymore. I didn't put the second one away, though. I just let it sit there, steam rising, slow, fading into the air like memory. I'd think about the last thing he said before he drove off. Keep it running, Bob. And I did. The days found their rhythm again. I worked, I listened, I kept the engines alive. But every once in a while I'd glance at that old clock on the counter, ticking steady, never skipping a beat, and I'd swear it was keeping time for both of us. One evening near Christmas, the sun dropped early behind the fields, painting everything copper and gold. I closed up the shop, locked the door, and walked down to the river. The air was sharp, the water dark and slow. Frost glimmered on the grass. I stood in the same spot Daniel and I had sat months before, where he'd let the letter drift away. The river sounded different in winter, heavier, slower, like it was carrying the weight of all the words we'd said. I pulled the wooden box from my coat pocket, the one he'd left me. Inside I'd added something new. A folded scrap of paper with 6 words written in my own hand. You were right. Forgiveness runs quiet. I set the box in the water and watched it drift. It bobbed once, twice, then slipped into the current and disappeared. I stayed there until the cold crept into my fingers, until the light left the sky. When I finally turned to go, I heard something faint. A car engine, somewhere in the distance. For a second, I thought it might